Buonasera a tutti. Good evening and welcome to the Italian Radio Hour. Io sono Viviana and I would like to welcome back our regular listeners and also welcome any new listeners. Also, be sure to like us on Instagram and Facebook at Italian Radio Hour and subscribe to our YouTube channel to catch up on any past video interviews. Vorrei dare il benvenuto ai nostri ascoltatori da tutto il mondo. Grazie per essere con noi anche oggi mentre continuiamo il nostro viaggio per l'Italia e la cultura italiana. In the 1950s, a New York radio station created La Grande Famiglia, a program for Italian Americans sponsored by a tomato company. The mechanism was simple but ingenious. In exchange for 10 labels as proof of purchase, a correspondent would go and record the voices of relatives in Italy. In a world without a telephone, the 13 seasons of the show represented, for many people, the only link between their loved ones and their homeland. In 2022, Cristiano, the author of the podcast, discovered that in America, there were thousands of records with recordings of the broadcast, sent as a souvenir by the radio station for the participating families. Thus began a search that reconnected the threads of personal and collective memories, starting from an extraordinary sound archive. So today, I'm really honored to be joined by two leading scholars in Italian American Studies, Professor Joseph Sciorra and Professor Laura Ruberto, who are also being part of this project of La Grande Famiglia. So with their respective backgrounds in folklore and also academic and cultural programs and they're going to share with us their field of studies, their contributions to the study of migration, memory, and material culture and identity within the Italian American experience. They have numerous publications and continuous collaborations together. And Ruberto and Sciorra are helping us listen differently to the Italian American past. While after talking about La Grande Famiglia, which is going to be a very interesting conversation, we're going to talk about also their current exhibition at the Calandra Institute entitled Creativity of World War II Italian POWs in the United States, which explores themes of voice, memory, and diaspora. So please don't go anywhere. Stay tuned. We'll be right back. Parli italiano? Do you want to learn, improve, or master your Italian? Istituto Mondo Italiano can help. Located in the heart of Regent Square, Mondo Italiano offers small group classes and one-on-one private tutoring, in person or online, to help you learn Italian in no time. Visit us online at istitutomondoitaliano.org. Well, welcome to the program, Laura and Joseph. How are you today?
Doing well. Thank you for having us.
Thank you so much for having us.
It is an honor to have the two of you at the same time. I feel the luckiest person on earth today because your publications, your studies, your research fields is something that I've been following and admiring for many, many years. We did have a chance also to meet at the Association of American Studies in Pittsburgh. And Laura, you are from Pittsburgh, originally from Pittsburgh as well, right?
I am originally from Pittsburgh. Yeah, I live here in California, but I was born and raised in Pittsburgh, born in near Bloomfield and raised in the North Hills. So I still have a lot of family there and close connections to Pittsburgh. So it was wonderful to get back to the YASA conference a few years ago.
Yes. So let me just ask you to please elaborate on your academic background and research field, and then Joseph, I'm going to ask you to do the same thing before we dive into our conversation today.
Sure. I have a very interdisciplinary background in what I'll call cultural studies. So I do a lot of work in film studies, but also with different kinds of visual culture, as material culture, what we call material culture or vernacular culture, which we could talk about more later. I also have done work on oral histories and even some translations. And all of my work in whatever topic it might be, from film to different kinds of creative expressions tends to float around issues between Italy and the US. So Italian American cultural histories of different kinds, but also Italian US relations and movement of things and people. So I have done work, some of it with Joseph, that I think is what we're kind of talking about now, but also a lot of work on my own around, again, Italian American film, but also kind of the relationship between Italian directors and their work in the US and elsewhere. I've worked on some work on Italian American women in California, for instance, specifically. So a variety of interests that I have and places that I direct my research, asking us to kind of rethink, what does it mean to be Italian American? How can we recognize a really diverse sense of what that identity in the past and in the contemporary moment looks like, and how can we think about the relationship Italian migration histories has to other kinds of migrations and other kinds of identities beyond an Italian one. So that's it, kind of in a nutshell, what I do.
Thank you, Laura. Joseph, elaborate on the many fields of studies that keep you busy.
Sure. Like Laura, my background academically is interdisciplinary. I started out working on anthropology and art history, focusing on non-Western art, and then moved on to looking at what was a developing field called performance studies, where looking at everything from a religious festival, a street festival, to ballet or opera or high art. So it was a way of featuring and being attuned to the ways of everyday culture, as it was an expanded field of study. And then eventually went on to get my PhD in folklore and folklife at University of Pennsylvania. And my area then at the time was really looking at a place like New York City, this huge cosmopolitan international kind of city, but looking at the ways in which people made New York their home, how they individualized, how they created social spaces that they can claim as their own, in either their homes, their front yards, their streets, their neighborhoods at large, and in various ways. So some of the earlier work that I was doing was in fact looking at Puerto Rican community gardens up in the Bronx and various parts of Manhattan. I was also exploring what developed in the late 1980s was a certain style of graffiti that was called a memorial wall art that moved itself from the trains, but was now appearing on walls of buildings and storefronts, commemorating those who had died in sort of unexpected and untimely death. But the vast majority of my work over the years has really kind of focused on Italian American cultural expressivity. I'm really concerned the ways in which everyday folks practice art in their lives, from the decoration of their home to the large scale kinds of activities, as I mentioned before, of religious saint and saint feasts in their neighborhoods. Because I feel that historically, and I'm not the only one to think this, but that historically those types of folk expressions, vernacular expressions, have been deemed sort of unimportant, have been deemed less significant, has been understood as a kind of residue of the past, and was kind of mindlessly carried over from Italy to the United States and practiced in a way that was sort of mindless, and not sort of understanding those kinds of things as constantly evolving, constantly changing, and being adapted and developed to take into consideration people's changing political lives, economic lives, social lives. And so that has been very much part of the way I've sort of structured and approached my scholarship. And a lot of the things that I do that are not sort of related to folk arts really comes out of that kind of ethnographic perspective and being attuned to what people say, what people do, and just being rather a good listener and understanding that people are fully capable of articulating their ideas, their feelings in their everyday lives.
Wonderful. And yes, so some of the manifestations, as you said, the festivals that were misconceived as kind of a sign of the past. And I think they're extremely important for two reasons. First of all, I think it gives people still a strong sign of belonging, that festival that people prepare for the whole year, and they are able then to pass it on to the families. But also, if those festivals have evolved in Italy, it allows us still, sometimes when something is a little bit stuck in time, for study purposes, it's equally important because they can tell us what it was that maybe the homeland has evolved. The same thing with dialects as well. Sometimes we find people who are in their 80s and 90s speaking a dialect that is no longer spoken in Italian, and whoever wants to study that has now the sample, the study group. So let's dive into La Grande Famiglia, because this is indeed a project that has brought your families somehow being featured in this. Can we elaborate on the details? What it was, what did people have to do in order to get their voices recorded? So we'll talk a little bit about the logistics first, and then we'll talk about your family stories and some of the messages. Maybe we might be able to hear a couple of clips, and then we'll discuss really the importance of La Grande Famiglia. Joseph, I think you were involved from the very beginning, right? This is something that you have been familiar with and worked on for quite some time, right? Before we got...
Right. So my research is something that was developed for, in fact, a book, 2 volumes that Laura and I worked on called New Italian Migrations to the United States.
I have them.
There you go.
For us.
We were in those 2 works, we were very interested in moving the conversation beyond the ones that have traditionally been found in immigration history and Italian American history and culture, in which Italians start coming in the 1980s, and for all intents and purposes end by either the 1920s or the 1940s with the onset of World War II. And as we all know, all of us experience in our personal lives, but also in other realms, that Italian immigration continued well after World War II, especially in the aftermath in the 40s, 50s, and 60s, with a kind of large contingent of working class immigrants arriving. But then from that period all the way up to present day, the continued immigration of Italians to the United States. And we were very much interested in exploring the history of it, the politics of it, but of course, because of our own interests in popular culture, folk culture, commercial culture, looking at the ways in which arts and other forms of expressivity were changed and developed because of these new migrations these new Italian migrations to the United States. So my article is one that appears in the volume 2 of New Italian Migrations to the United States, and emerges out of the simple fact that when I was growing up, we had in our family 6 78 RPM recordings. And they were the voices of our relatives in Italy. And at the time, I didn't know what exactly they were as a child. We would listen to them the way we would listen to other recordings of music. And I was struck at that time by both the sort of the heartfeltness of the voices that were coming through, and at sometimes rather strange voices in terms of what people were talking about, and didn't quite understand how my relatives' voices got onto a recording, and that sat in our collection along with, popular artists of the day. So doing some investigation, especially for the article in the two volumes, I found out that the Grande Famiglia was a radio program that appeared 15 minutes twice a day on a New York-based radio station, WOV AM, which was founded in 1929 and went all the way up until the late 1950s. But this specific program, 15 minutes a day, was started in 1948, I should say, and all the way to 1961. And what did it involve? It was a promotion for the Progresso Food Company. Very ingenious, very clever. And what it is that and it changed over the years, for a number of labels from both tomato cans and from olive oil cans, they would send a reporter, a journalist, to go visit your hometown or wherever else you wanted them to go, record these voices, then air them on the radio station during the day and at night, and eventually then send you 78 RPM. And that's how we came to have these collections. As you said in the beginning, what does it mean? At a time when people didn't have telephones, when writing letters took a long way to get back and forth across the Atlantic, this was a way for people to communicate in a sort of one-way version. Mm-hmm. The people speaking didn't know that they were just speaking into a microphone, and some of them really didn't understand what they were doing. You hear the voices, and they sound as if they think they're talking on a telephone or communicating in a direct, immediate way in which they're not. So I wrote this article, got it published, and not too long ago, maybe about 3 years ago, Cristiano Barducci reached out to me, and he is a podcast producer in Italy. And he had found out first that the nephew of the journalist, Giuliano Gerbi, who traveled literally from the Alps to Sicily, recording these voices over a decade. His son Sandro Giuliano's nephew Sandro had written an article about Giuliano's life in the United States. Giuliano Gerbi was an Italian Jew, and after the 1938 and the fascist regime instituted the race laws, he and his siblings fled to the United States and also to Latin America. After the war, Giuliano Gerbi went back and took up his role as this Grande Famiglia journalist. So between Sandro Gerbi, Cristiano, we communicated, and I was able to provide Cristiano with, dates, information, and the recordings of my family, but ultimately linking him with other people who had these recordings here in the United States. And in fact, Laura possesses one of these recordings that were made not in New York City or not transmitted in New York City, but by the Pittsburgh radio station, because La Grande Famiglia was aired in several locations all the way from not only New York and Pittsburgh, but down in Florida and as well as California through this transmission service.
Okay, so Laura, sorry to put you on hold, but I do have one of the recordings from the Sciorra's family that I would like to play just a few seconds of it, because then we can kind of elaborate also with you, Laura, as well about the content, the messages, but it's not really just the news, but more the expressions, the language, and what it meant for people to part, and who knows if there were ever going to be reunited. So this is Joseph, Caruncchio, that's the hometown of your family, correct?
That's my father's hometown, yes.
Of Chieti?
Yep.
Okay, so let's hear just a few seconds.
Ready to refresh your home?
Oh,
Visit Levin
I
Furniture and
guess we
Mattress,
are
where
going to
quality
have
meets style. At Levin, you'll find
we're going to have a little bit of commercial from whoever it is, but I can't I have to go through it. So I guess they're getting a bonus on extra commercial time.
everything you need, from stylish sofas and cozy recliners to dining sets and bedroom furniture. Plus, shop top mattress brands like Purple, Stearns & Foster, and Tempur-Pedic, all backed by our low price guarantee. Right now, enjoy amazing store-wide savings and take advantage of flexible financing options. Shop online at levinfurniture.com or stop by one of our showrooms today. Levin Furniture and Mattress, furnishing beautiful homes since 1920.
Ok, hopefully after this.
Ed eccomi col più bel regalo per il signore Enrico Sciorra del 370 Wadsworth Avenue, New York City. Io sono certo che è in ascolto anche lo zio Nicolino e gli altri parenti. Sono col microfono della Grande Famiglia a Carunchio, nel loro paese, proprio a Carunchio. E qui vicino a me c'è mamma Filomena, l'ascoltino.
In questo momento so perché mi viene in mente il primo distacco da te. Partisci per il collegio, ricordi? Piansi, soffrivi. Mi pareva di essere sola senza di te. Ora che tu sei partito per l'America, puoi immaginare come mi sento maggiormente sola. Sola nella mia casa, senza nessuno e forse senza più la speranza di vederti tornare a lavorare vicino a me sotto il cielo d'Italia. Ed ora mando un saluto a tutti i parenti e a te un abbraccio, mamma.
È un po' commossa, gli mandi un bel bacio, mamma, così, sulla mano. Tanti baci. Ecco, così, sulla mano. Ecco, questo è un bacio della sua mamma, un bacio che viene da Carunchio. Numero 2, Gloria.
Okay. So obviously these messages are full of emotions and can never be they're priceless. Being able to hear voices of people that are no longer with us, and those goodbyes. You know, I can just picture also my mom the first time I got on the plane. So let's elaborate a little bit about what are some of the recordings. You know, in addition to the goodbyes, sometimes people were talking about their careers and their, like for instance, Laura, your family. If I remember correctly, your father was talking about his employment as a lab technician. Do I remember correctly? And your mom as an interpreter?
Well, that wasn't, yeah, their story is a little bit different than what Joseph described. Their recording happened a few years later in the late 50s. And I think what you're referring to is the interview that Cristiano, had with them just a couple of years ago. So Joseph, if I remember correctly, when you wrote that essay, at the time that you wrote the essay for New Italian Migrations, you had your collection, and then you had heard my family's recording, and those were the two you had, which actually helped explain some of the nuances of these recordings too, and some of the style that was common in these recordings, with those really heartfelt goodbyes and heartfelt lamentations of longing and detachment, but also some of the ways that the Gerbi was kind of encouraging certain reactions. I think, like right there, we heard that was your grandmother, right?
Right.
And she's being prompted to kiss her hand, to, you know, a kiss. And in the recording that I have with my mother, who's about 19 at the time, is also being prompted to kind of kiss her hand, to send my father a kiss. So I think that's also sort of interesting to see how he was creating a show, right? He was creating good radio that people would want to listen to. In my parents' case, my father emigrated first from Campania to Pittsburgh, and my mother was from Rome, and she was still back in Rome. And so it was my father in the late 50s, in 58, who collected the Progresso labels in Pittsburgh, sent them in to this recording. In my mother's case, she didn't, because she was living in Rome, and that's where all of the show's post-production was done before the recordings were sent to Italy. She went to the station at Via Porta Pinciana to do the recording with her own mother and my father's aunt at the time. And it's very brief. It's only about a minute and a half rather than the ones from the mid 50s were longer, I believe. And she just gives it's a very simple series of greetings. She's asked, they're not married yet. She's asked if they talk a bit about how they're going to do a wedding at a distance, talking about bringing up the issue of a matrimonio di procura, and which a kind of like wedding by I'm not sure what the right way to put that in English.
Proxy?
Yeah, exactly. That's right. A proxy wedding, right? Which were very common until not that long ago. But what Cristiano was able to do was first interview my parents, who were at the time living in the United States, via something like this through Zoom. But then also he went to Cairano, to my father's village, where my parents were a year later were at the time, and spent a few days with them in person in my father's village. And he also had another recording that my parents did of their actual wedding in 1959 back in Rome. So in the podcast, La Grande Famiglia, he puts together these snippets of time and of voices from 1958, from the radio broadcast from 1959, their wedding, and from, I believe it was 2022 in Campania, piecing together this issue of memory, of nostalgia, but also a history of migration and what it means for people later in their life to reflect on the choices they made 40, 50, or even longer than that, 60 years earlier, to emigrate to the US.
Joseph, obviously you can comment on your recordings. I gave the word straight to Laura after listening to one of your family recordings, but maybe you can also elaborate a little bit about also what those messages or information, in addition to the actual messages, other things that maybe we're able to pick up that maybe pictures or written records didn't provide to us. Because, for instance, we hear a certain cadence from the town, which again, now so many years after might have changed, or maybe, I don't know, dialect words that are no longer in use. So I don't know if there was any analysis that was done also on the actual language, in addition to the messages, and how people were in those years were talking to one another. I wouldn't be surprised if there is a voi referring to a you singular, for a greater sign of respect. So I don't know if you want to comment on the style of the communications.
Sure. I mean, one of the things that you may notice, it seems, and this was sort of pointed out to me to relatives who I shared with back in Italy, it seems as if in the recording that you played, that my grandmother is actually reading. And so it's clearly that she gave some thought to composing her ideas, so that she could express herself as well as she wanted to, instead of where you hear some other people, and even in the recordings in my family, but other WOV Grande Famiglia recordings, where people are just spontaneously speaking, and not knowing really what to say. I'm talking to you. Hey, can you hear me? Everything is good. Things like that. So, in that case of my grandmother, she took the time to compose. For the vast majority of the recordings in my family, they're speaking standard Italian. There's probably one person who has somewhat of some dialect use. So it speaks to the fact that my family and that generation had some level of education in standard Italian. Clearly, this recordings is from Abruzzo. There's accents of their Italian, but for the most part, they're speaking standard Italian. The news, what they're trying to convey is someone is getting married, who just had a baby, somebody moved from one place to the other. But there's, mostly with all of these recordings, there's this sort of deeply heartfelt expression of longing across this great divide that separates the various individuals, right? And the idea that one is like, do not forget me, which is one of the, in my father Enrico's cousin says, like, do not forget us. We're here. Try to come and visit. Let us try to meet again. And this idea that despite this, the great divide that migration brings about for families, that connection is maintained over time and over distance. And I think that's one of the sort of important messages that is conveyed through not only the recordings of my family, but the others that we've now uncovered as a result of both the article being published, posting information to social media, and then even Cristiano's own research as well. It's remarkable that these artifacts and these voices are being emerged because of this one academic article that gets published, and now the popularization of this information through Cristiano's podcast. So hopefully we'll be hearing more and more of
coming
these
to surface. So there is not an archive. Obviously, these are jewels. They're one in a million. So the Progresso, how about the company probably has changed ownership, I would assume. So maybe they don't have the same interest in tracing going back. And so it's really up to the individuals to really search their basements and their grandparents' basements, and then contact whether it's yourself. But another thing that in addition to the one-on-one communication, we have access to a little bit of community information, because often one was updating and such is doing this is happening. So there is all this ancillary information that gets sprinkled in these messages that, again, might give us some additional information about what's going on in the town, and other characters that never got the microphone, so to speak. Laura, so in this practice, how does La Grande Famiglia maybe connect to the broader migration patterns and memory practices that you might have encountered?
It's such a wonderful example of how the movement of Italians to the US and elsewhere it's not just one direction, that there's this continual ways that connections happened in the past and happen still now. And that these feelings of, as Joseph said, these feelings of wanting to stay connected were there in the past, and it's really interesting to think about how mass media helped that. Up until the 1960s, there wasn't a lot of use of telephone calls. There really was the only way to stay connected was through writing letters, occasionally telegrams for important events, perhaps. And even that was very limited. And so I know even in my parents' case, who emigrated again in the late 1950s, and my mother didn't come to the U.S. until 1962, that they only spoke on the phone a couple times in the years that they were living in two different countries. So that we don't think about mass media, like even television and movies, have a part in this as well. Some of my research has been about the circulation of Italian post-war films on American television in the 1950s and 60s, and some of the first ways that those post-war immigrants got to keep hearing Italian language, standard language or regional language, was in the ways that post-war Italian films were shown on televisions in places like New York City and Pittsburgh and Chicago and San Francisco, so that there were ties that kept going even as the generations that had arrived before World War II were maybe speaking less Italian or feeling perhaps less directly connected to Italy. At the same time, we have the influx of consumer items like film, like consumer products, like images, like actors and performers who are coming from Italy that are kind of keeping these connections with Italy going. And I think sometimes we don't think about that so much, and we kind of make a division between an older third, fourth, fifth generation Italian American identity that has somewhat disconnected itself from contemporary Italy, and we forget that there's really been this like ongoing, constant weaving back and forth.
Yeah, absolutely. Because as I said, sometimes the disconnection, if I might, maybe I just made up a word, but it was not due because they didn't care. It's because there were also financial hardships where people didn't sometimes earn money fast enough to go back when that relative was still alive. And so we heard a story in a previous episode of our podcast, and that was the case. So absolutely. So there were some other factors. And so Joseph, before we start talking maybe about the exhibit at the Institute, what do you hope the impact will be of these recordings, and maybe a call of action to people also, if anyone comes in contact with these recordings, what should they be doing? So,
I mean, a call for action is a great kind of term, because I mean, one of the things that these recordings for me represent are these little known elements and factors of sort of Italian migration, not only to the United States, but elsewhere, that, you know, if one isn't paying attention, gets lost between the history pages, right? And it's not only something like WOV, it could be something like the art of embroidery or other kind of elements that don't take center stage in the grand story of Italian migration throughout the world. So recovering these stories, recovering these voices is very much in keeping with the kind of work that I do. So if anyone comes across these recordings, and you know, some of them can just be a 78 that has nothing on it. There are no labels on it.
I was going to ask you what the
Some of them have no labels on them. Some of them don't even have an inscription on them. So first thing you got to, you know, and this is the issue, right? I'm wondering how many people who listen to your podcast know what a 78 recording is. You know, a 78 RPM recording. Have they seen one? Have they held one? Do they know what to do with it? So that's one of the difficulties. I think, you know, people don't even know what these objects are and what they can hold. So, you know, you come across it if it's in your basement or in your attic or somewhere in a closet. Try to find someone that can play these recordings. And then if you're hearing voices in Italian, they might be part of the Grande Famiglia. And I'm easily found on the internet, and they can reach out to me.
Wonderful. So let's take a minute, a short break to hear from our sponsors, and then we'll continue with our conversation. Applying for Italian citizenship? Need documents translation? Istituto Mondo Italiano provides certified translations and assistance services. Be sure to visit us at istitutomondoitaliano.org and schedule your free consultation. Un caffè, per favore. My first cup of coffee sets the tone for my entire day, and I get my coffee at La Prima Espresso. La Prima has been brewing Pittsburgh's best coffee for over 35 years. try any of their in-house roasted varieties of beans from all over the world at home, or come and enjoy an espresso or a cappuccino at any of their locations, where their friendly baristas and familiar faces will make you feel at home. Visit laprima.com to get La Prima Espresso coffee at your door. Okay, welcome back. We are kind of turning the page, but not that much, with a beautiful picture that, Laura, I would like you to describe for us as the introduction to the current exhibit at the Calandra Institute that opened just maybe last week, a few days ago. And also, if you can tell us how long people will have a chance to come and see the exhibit, and what was the impetus or the way that the exhibit play out. Wonderful inlay work.
Yeah, sure. So this is a photo from the exhibit Creativity in World War II Italian POWs in the United States that's currently up at the Calandra Institute in Manhattan until the end of September. And this is, as you said, a wonderful snapshot of an Italian prisoner of war, specifically a member of an Italian service unit, doing some inlay work. I found this photo, among many others, at the National Archives in College Park, Maryland. We don't know who he is. We don't know his name. We don't have a lot of other information, but we can tell from his patch that says Italy, that he was part of what was called an Italian service unit member. So during the Second World War, the British and the Allies generally, at one point or another, captured hundreds of thousands of Italian prisoners of war. About 51,000 of them were brought to the United States. Others were sent to all parts of the globe, from India to Australia, Scotland, and many other places. The exhibit mainly focuses on those in the United States, and something, as we know, something a little bit unusual happened with Italy, Italy's relationship to the war, so that after September 1943, Italy signs an armistice, and therefore eventually becomes allies with Great Britain and the US and the Allies. And so the situation for these 51,000 prisoners of war had to kind of change. And over about a 6-month period of time, those 51,000 that were here in the US had an opportunity to sign an allegiance to the Allies. And those who signed an allegiance, which were about over 32,000, those who signed an allegiance were the ones who got the Italy patch and were members of what were called Italian service units, and were a little bit more free, but they were still officially considered prisoners of war. And then the others that did not sign an allegiance remained prisoners of war and were really categorized as a high security threat, and with potentially still very committed to fascism. And so both of those groups stayed in the United States until the end of the war, and all of them express themselves in various moments and in various ways creatively. And so this exhibit focuses on the art and artistry and architecture created by Italian prisoners of war. So kind of telling that story through that creativity.
Mm-hmm. And so maybe Joseph, if you want to comment on this picture. So it's not just about wanting to create. I mean, there is mastery, but here, both with the Cathedral of Messina, I think Laura, that was one of your pictures. Then this one found in the archives. They're trying to recreate that Italy that they remember or they lived, or the traditions, like the nativity set. Il presepio is probably one of the. So Joseph, can you kind of elaborate on the sentiments also that these objects that you both have selected to present can give to the exhibit goers.
Sure. I mean, one of the things to keep in mind is that you had a full realm of skills in operation. There were people who were highly trained artisans. They were architects. They were musicians. They were writers of various sorts who were also prisoners, who were soldiers and then became prisoners. And then there were folks who had, that were working in more kind of vernacular folk styles like exhibited here in the Presepio. What I think, and both Loud and I were very intrigued by this find that she discovered in the National Archives, is the ways in which a kind of traditional Presepio, which you can see the manger scene on the left, is incorporated into a landscape that seems to have, Islamic architectural features there and signals to at least to us, the presence in North Africa, where a lot of the fighting, of course, occurred and where many of the prisoners were taken in. So, I mean, this is sort of, and very typical of the Presepio tradition in general, of sort of adapting this ancient Bethlehem to various local scenes, whether it is in fact in Italy and as what happens in the United States, where Italians who come here build a presepio that might reflect their United States experience. But I mean, this need to be creative, right? This desire to be creative, which of course is supplemented by the camps, the red people, folks, institutions like the Red Cross are supplying them with materials, and of course the camp guards and the people there, the United States Army want to keep folks busy, right? They want to keep them occupied so that they don't get bored, that they don't get irritated and have other thoughts on their mind. But this need to express themselves artistically, and the exhibit runs the gamut in the things that it displays, from the visual arts to performances to theater to music, that are the various ways in which Italian POWs, in this case, sought to occupy their time, but also to express themselves in these kind of adverse conditions.
Mm-hmm. And possibly also the variety of materials presented would engage the visitors, especially the younger generations, with a different kind of archival material that is not perceived just as the museum material. So here, and it's so important that we all understand how understanding the Italian American experience, how important it is, and how important it is also to maintain and preserve, whether it's through oral history, objects, pictures, and so forth, especially in a culture where we're like living by the minute, even communication sometimes is. Just in general, I wanted to, I don't know if there is any other comment or upcoming events related to the exhibit that you would like to tell our audience, or anything that is dear to you regarding the exhibit. I can.
Shall I? Yeah, sure. In 2 weeks, we're showing a film about the Letterkenny Chapel, or the Italian Chapel in Letterkenny, there in Pennsylvania. So that's happening in 2 weeks.
The Letterkenny Chapel is also featured in the exhibit as well.
Yeah, I think I saw a picture of it. Yeah.
And one of many religious structures that Italian POWs created in various camps in the United States.
But
and
one
then,
of the few that actually still exists. So
indeed.
you can go visit. There are only maybe 3 that I know of in the United States that still exist, and one is the Letterkenny one. So another one is in California, and another one is in Illinois. Or in Indiana. I apologize. Indiana.
So, and we're taking a break during the summer months here, but Lauda will be returning to New York City to present her work on the creativity of Italian POWs. And it's, important to note that the basis for this exhibit, this material is all attributed to the research that Laura has been conducting for a good number of years now. So we're really fortunate that she'll be returning to New York in September to present on her work.
Mm-hmm. And I can wait to receive the book, Such is Life, Ma la vita è fatta così. A little bit off topic, but still, would you mind elaborating on your grandmother's memoir?
Sure. So my grandmother, who was from the Cairano, the province of Avellino, emigrated to Pittsburgh in the mid-1950s. After the 1980 Irpinia earthquake, her husband, my grandfather, went back to Italy to see how the Irpinia had landed after the earthquake. Cairano was right near the epicenter. And my grandmother was kind of left alone, in a sense, for a few weeks. And she, in that moment, was sort of encouraged to write her memories. She had only a second grade education in Italy. She never learned to speak English. And she really expressed herself through her needlework and through her cooking and her caring for family. So it was quite striking that she decided to write her memories, and she wrote this very heartfelt story about her life in Italy and her immigration and her first years in Bloomfield and Pittsburgh. And she really wrote it with almost like all in one breath. It has very few periods in it, no paragraphs. It just flows out of her. And so many years after she wrote it, when I started researching Italian American history, I kind of learned about this story by my aunts, who had been the ones who had kind of handed her the notebook and encouraged her to write in the first place. And so I translated the original, and Bordighera published that a number of years ago. The original notebook is now at the Heinz History Center, that includes a number of other family items specifically related to Pittsburgh, and some of her needlework, as well as a model tank that her husband, my grandfather, had made while he was a POW in the U.S. So,
which I think I might have seen among the pictures in the.
Yeah, and it's on display at the Heinz Center too, so you could see it there in the Italian American section.
Okay, yeah. I will be heading there in a couple of weeks for an event. So it's so amazing how, we're geographically dislocated. I'm from Rome. Yes, you're from Pittsburgh, so we have the Pittsburgh connection. Then there is Joseph, and then all of a sudden, I will be seeing artifacts of a family who was from. It's just beautiful. It just Joseph, sorry, it looked like you wanted to add something.
No, not at all, not at all.
But I will let you add something, because along with her book, with the book we just mentioned, there is also the volume of Italian folk that is coming. So if you can just share a little bit about. Some of the images that typically we associate with Italian Americans, and then what you were trying to do with your publication.
Right. Italian Folk was an anthology of various contributors who were looking at folk culture, vernacular culture of Italian Americans. It's now, well over 10 years that the book was published by Fordham University Press, but I know that it continues to get used in classrooms and read in various places. It really runs the gamut on various different genres. So everything, the various authors are looking at the development of Sunday dinner in a place like Harlem by Simone Chinotto, a food historian. The idea, one of my favorites, is an examination of the second kitchen, or the basement kitchen, by Lara Lara Pascali, who actually is Canadian, did work in Montreal and Toronto, but also came down to New York and looked at some Brooklyn second kitchens, really important work. My contribution was on a wonderful Sicilian language poet called Vincenzo Ancona, who operated here in Brooklyn and did these wonderful epic poems about his memories of life in Sicily as a contadino, the struggles and the hardships that he went through, but also his experiences as he encountered New York City and the various adjustments that he had to make. A number of wonderful articles. It's really worth taking a look at. It's still in publication and easy to find. Italian folk. Thank you for the plug.
No, absolutely. As I said, you just made my job easier with elongating my reading list, getting ready for this. I mean, some are still a couple months away, but the books are the first things that get into the suitcase. So now I have plenty. I'm set for the summer. There are a few more, but that was just go ahead, Laura.
No, I'll just add that The Italian Folk was one of the first books in a series that Nancy Carnevale and I edit for Fordham University Press. That was originally called Critical Studies in Italian America, and that's now called Critical Studies in Italian Migrations. And our most recent books are works that talk about some of the migratory and transnational movements between places such as Italy and Argentina, and Italy and Brazil, and Italy and China, as well as a lot of books that focus on Italian America. So you can add that to your place to seek new reading as well.
Absolutely. So thank you, Professors Sciorra and Ruberto, for sharing your time and insights and deep commitment to preserving and amplifying the Italian-American experience, and your work, whether through scholarship, exhibitions, or recovered voices, just remind us of the power of memory and the enduring bonds between places, people, and generations. And so indeed, it's been this conversation has been a true pleasure to explore these stories. But unfortunately, our time together is up. Il Big Ben ha detto stop, and it's time for us to say arrivederci e alla prossima. We want to thank you for tuning in into the program. And if you have any questions or comments, or if you have any topics you would like us to address, please contact us at the italianradiohour@gmail.com. We would love to hear from you. And remember, if you or any of your family and friends have missed a prior episode or would like to listen to this episode again, subscribe to the Italian Radio Hour on YouTube or where you catch your favorite podcasts. And don't forget to share, because sharing is caring. So one more time, my thank you to Joseph Sciorra and Laura Ruberto. Ruberto, our sponsors, Istituto Mondo Italiano and La Prima Espresso. Until next time, alla prossima. Ciao, ciao.
Grazie, ciao.
Bye-bye, Viviana.